What's up guys, it's the new sensation, Big Annotation here, and today I'm going to be profiling, I think, my favourite black deck to have come out ever, and that being none other than the Set 18 Shroom Salsa leader. So not the Set 12 version, but the Set 18 one. I have loved this deck. Since it came out, it has been a black deck that I have played very, very consistently and just always really enjoyed playing it. Unfortunately, it's not a deck that I think is at all competitive at the moment, although it is getting pieces to slowly get there, obviously, with the new anniversary box support and everything like that. And slowly it's just getting more and more generic support that overall works very well in the deck as well. So that's amazing to see. But yeah, it's a very fun deck. Like I said, I don't think it's anything competitive, anything, you know, it's going to be winning any regionals anytime soon or anything like that, but it's very fun to play, and the build that I've worked on now with the recent support from the anniversary box runs much more smoothly than it used to, so I figured it's time that I bring the deck back on the channel with a profile. You might have seen recently as well, I ended up winning one of the Lookouts locals with this deck as well. Unfortunately I wasn't streaming that particular event, but I know that the Lookout was streaming the event. So they should have a couple of the games that I played were on stream. I think I was against U7 Goku, the new yellow U7 Goku for one of them, and against blue Gogeta for the other. So if you guys are interested in those, I think they're still on the Lookouts Twitch channel or their YouTube, so worth giving those a look into. But enough said about that, we'll just hop straight into the deck. And I'll probably explain a couple of the cards here and there, because I know the actual archetype cards maybe aren't so well known, which definitely plays into one of this deck's strengths, being that people don't really know how to play against it. So on the leader, we have Shroom Salsa. It's got a very simple auto on the front side where when it attacks, you warp the top 2 cards from your deck, and then you search the top 5 cards for a Demon God or Demon Realm Race to add to your hand. And the reason why you're warping the top cards of your deck is because a lot of the archetype plays from warp, but also the awaken condition is when your life is at 4 or less, or there are 6 or more black cards in your warp, you can warp a card from your hand and then draw 2, untap 1, and go down to 6 life to awaken. So the awaken is actually very powerful because on paper it's pretty much the same as a draw 1, untap 1 awaken. But because the fact that you get to warp a card from your hand to then draw an extra card, you're obviously cycling an extra card deeper into your deck just off the awaken alone. But it also means that you're setting up your warp on your awaken, because a lot of the cards in your hand you'll actually want in your warp in the early game, which is super nice to just have that utility, because you can kind of just get rid of a dead card from your hand to then cycle an extra card deeper into your deck on awaken. On the backside, it has the worst permanent I've ever seen on a leader, or one of the worst at least, which is that when you would place a card from your combo area into the drop area, it would get removed from the game instead. So any sort of drop area effects are super hard to set up in this deck, things like Koitsukai or anything else. Much harder to set up in this deck as they would normally be, because if you're on your awaken side, which you spend most of the game on this side, you're going to not just be able to, you know, combo a card and put it in the drop to then get the rest of its effect. And it makes it especially important for this deck having to cycle cards from your Z energy into the drop to then cycle the drop back into your warp so that you can then play your cards again. And that's kind of the main thing to get to grips with when playing this deck is, first of all, you're going to have to Z-charge pretty much everything that you can, so that you can obviously keep it in the game, otherwise it will just get removed from game and you can't ever get that back. So you Z-charge everything you can, and then a big part about playing this deck is, like I say, cycling the Z energy back into the drop and then running enough overrealms, both big and small overrealms, so that you can cycle your drop back into your warp and then actually play the cards from your warp again. And so as the Black Z deck has expanded, the deck has naturally just gotten a lot better, because obviously originally when the deck came out you just had the 2-drop Demigraph to play with, and that was awful. Now the deck has, or the Z deck has, a lot more options. There's a lot cheaper plays that you can do and dump quite a lot of Z energy in one go, so that you can refuel your drop very quickly now in comparison to how the deck used to play. So it's a lot easier to kind of play around that mechanic of the leader now, which is nice. But it is definitely just something to bear in mind. And then on the backside, on this leader, when you attack, you warp a Demon God or Demon Realm Race from your hand to draw 2. So again, you're able to cycle the did cards into your from your hand into your warp to then draw 2, which is great because, like I say, this deck has a lot of cards that are going to be playing from warp. And then it's got an activate battle once per turn. If your leader is in battle, you can combo with a Demon God or Demon Realm Race from your warp that isn't a super combo and is mono black. And that's really where the value of this leader comes in, and that's why I tend to build this deck much more in the control route. This version of the deck can actually play a lot more aggressively because of the new anniversary box support. But generally this deck, I believe, should be built as a control deck, and that's kind of what this deck is, or what this build is meant to be, same as my older builds as well. Because you get so much value from that activate battle. Being able to free combo a guy from your warp every turn makes this leader really, really tanky, both offensively and defensively. And once we get to the Z leader, that obviously multiplies. And yeah, obviously the tankiness is great, but then it also enables some of your plays from the warp, because a lot of the archetype cards require you to have specific cards in combo to play themselves from the warp and stuff. So that's the leader. Going into the 1-drops and the early Self-Awakeners, we have 4 of the Meki Kabura and 4 of the Salsa. So the Meki Kabura is just a 1-drop Overlord once per turn, which is very relevant for this deck. When it's played, you draw a card and then you can warp up to the top 2 cards from your deck. And then the Salsa is when it's played, you search top 5 for a Demon God or Demon Realm Race, and then you can warp up to the top 2 cards from your deck. So with these 8 cards combined, it'll allow you to pretty much always awaken on turn 2 with your leader front side effect warping 2 from the top of your deck, and then these guys each warping 2 from the top of your deck. So as long as you can find 1 or 2 copies of each of these, you're kind of set to awaken on turn 2, no matter what the game state is, which is great because you want to flip to your leader backside as soon as possible to get value from that activate battle and to start Z charging so that you have infinite Z energy for all of your plays. And then they each have their own little extra effects. So the Meki Kabura I've already covered, it's got Overlord, but it also has a activate main where you can tap 3 and check the bottom card of your deck. And if it's a Demon God card with Servant, then you can play it. Otherwise, you don't play it. I genuinely think I've used that effect once in my entire time playing this deck. That effect is really awful because all of the Servants in the deck play for much cheaper than 3 energy, and they're also quite tricky to get to the bottom of your deck. We run a couple of cards to help set that up, but that effect is like very worthless. You really never use that effect unless you're in a very simplified game state where you've got nothing in warp and nothing in hand. And then the Salsa has actually a really useful effect, which is a limit 1 auto. When it's used in a combo from your warp, it gets plus 1k combo power. So on offense, that doesn't really mean much, but it means on defense, it's a 6k combo power, which in most cases is going to act like a 10k. And that's really where the value of this activate battle starts to rack up, because you're pretty much going to be comboing to 21 or 25k on defense every single turn, which is amazing because it's going to free combo out of up to a 20k swing. And speaking of our other free 10k combos, we are also running 4 copies of the 8-drop Unending Nightmare. This guy is a 1-cost 10k, but again, because he's a Demon God or Demon Realm Race, you can combo him from Warp for free, so he becomes a 0-cost 10k from Warp. Also important to note that he has both Shroom and Salsa in their character name, so that's going to be relevant for some cards coming up. This guy is a Double Strike Servant, 25k, so 35k Double Strike. When he would be placed in the drop area from your battle area or combo area, he gets placed at the bottom of your deck instead. So the idea behind that in design is probably to then set up the pay 3 effect for this, so that when this dies, it goes to the bottom of your deck, and then you can pay 3 and play it back out again. You're still never going to do that because this guy plays himself for 2 energy anyways, so you might as well just like find more copies of this card and then play him for 2 anyways. But also a lot of removal doesn't place him in the drop anyways, like warping or sending to the bottom of the deck and then sending other cards to the bottom of the deck, that sort of thing. And you don't even play this card all that often, unless you get like floodgated and you're just getting some value here and there. But what he does is you can play him for 2 energy on Activate Battle if you have 3 or more energy and 2 or more black cards in your combo area. So again, the Activate Battle on this is going to set up half of that. and then you can just combo off a cantrip or combo off a card from hand, and that is fine. And then when he's played, your opponent chooses one of their battle cards, ignoring barrier, and one card in their hand, and they both go to the warp. This card is like fine barrier removal, but it's just frustrating that your opponent gets to choose. So if they have any semblance of battle cards on their board, they just choose the weakest one, and this card becomes extremely devalued. He's mainly there for the hand control, and this deck does kind of like to play as a grindy, slow hand control deck with this and the Salsa, which we'll show in a minute. It's nice that it's Servant, so you can overlord it off. And again, that places it on the bottom of the deck, which is never going to be relevant, but, you know, it might come up again eventually. But yeah, very nice card just to be able to play as a big guy and get a little bit of value here and there. The main value of this card is that it's a free 10k from Warp, and that it is both Shroom and Salsa name. Something worth noting as well, in the 1-drop section, we're not running the 2-drop Shroom anymore. Which I was in the previous profile. The reason for that is the Shroom was always the weakest of the kind of early cantrips of Awakening guys, because it's a 10k, it requires you to already have 2 cards in Warp to be able to play it. It's a 10k, so it's not even swinging into anything. In theory, it can get you like gradual advantage because it gets its effect on swing rather than on play, but it's a 10k with no protection, so it's just not going to live. And additionally to that, there's not nearly as much space in this deck as there used to be. So we just cut down on those 2-drop Shrooms, and we're just running the 8 cantrips instead, which works absolutely fine. Yeah, you just don't really need the little Shroom anymore. And as well, if he gets counterplayed by like a charismatic villain or any guy that rests like Steadfast or something like that, then you're not getting its effect, whereas these guys do. And then you can also combo these guys off the board because, again, they don't have to swing to get their effects. So the 2-drop Shroom is, like, fine, but it was always just a bit of a placeholder card in the old builds. But now we have Anniversary Box support, we don't need to run placeholder cards. So yeah, we have the 4 8-drops, and then going into some of the new support cards, we also have 4 of the new 6-drop, and this card is absolutely spectacular. So he, again, is a Shroom Salsa name. So he counts as both names, which is perfect because that sets up the majority of your plays. He's a 20k. He plays himself for 1 energy as an activate battle if you have 1 or more Shroom and Salsa card in your combo area, which means that if you have another copy of him in the combo area, or you have copies of the 8-drop in the combo area, you're just going to be able to play him from for 1 from your Warp, which is perfect, because these guys are both Shroom and Salsas. He's got an auto. When he attacks, you can take up to 2 life and then warp 1 of your battle cards. And finally, you get to choose 1 of your opponent's battle cards to warp, which is great. And he's also got an activate main, which is basically that you can Z Awaken when you're on 3 or less life rather than 2 or less life, by paying an energy and placing 3 of your Z energy into the drop. So same conditions as the Z leader, just 3 or less life rather than 2. This card is absolutely spectacular. It has solved so many issues for the deck. So issues it has solved for the deck is 1, Self-Awakening. You would often get stalled at 6 life, and then in the sort of long grindier games, you would then peter out because you wouldn't be able to get your swings through, you wouldn't be able to use things like your token negate or your super combos to push at all, and some decks would just be able to outgrind you because of that. Whereas this lets you take life when you need to. It gets cards like Super Kamehameha live, it gets cards like your Gohan Rare live. It gets token negates live. It means you can get to your Z leader faster if you need to. Maybe if you're getting stalled on 4 life and you want to just take yourself down to 3 or 2 to get the Z Awaken. It's also solid removal for the deck. So the 8-drop, obviously your opponent chooses the battle card that they warp, which is awful. And the deck really outside of that didn't really have any reliable removal. There's the 3-drop Shroom, which I'm going to get into in a second. But that guy only warps 4 costs or less. So the deck really struggled for removal, and this guy has again fixed that issue because you just warp any battle card on swing. It's not a servant, so you're able to actually get that value every single turn that it sticks around for. And then it also doesn't cost you a card from your hand when you play it from the warp, because the little Shroom and the little Salsa 3-drops, those guys you have to warp a card from your hand when you play them from warp. This guy doesn't, so you can maintain your big hand size, which this deck can draw a lot of cards, You can maintain your big hand size while just developing a 20k guy that removes and self-awakens you, or self-Z awakens, I guess we should say nowadays. Yeah, this card is absolutely amazing. I really love this card. And the fact that his 6-drop is relevant as well, because, you know, just generally blue can't really deal with 6-drops because most of its removal is kind of 5 cost or less or 7 cost or higher. Yeah, this card is absolutely spectacular for the deck, and it's really, really a card that the deck needed. And then going into the 3-drops, we have 4 copies of Demon God Salsa Stormclad. So I mentioned the 3-drop Shroom just now. We're not running that card anymore. We're just running the Salsa. The Salsa was always the better out of the two, but you had to run the Shroom to kind of fill up on names because you needed Shroom names to bring in the Salsa. So what the Salsa does is got an activate battle for 1 energy, where if there's 1 or more Shroom cards in your combo area, you can pay 1 and warp a card from your hand to then play this card from your hand or warp. And then he's a 10k servant, and when he's played, you can optionally warp the top card of your deck, and then your opponent warps a card from the hand. So again, this leans into the gradual hand control element that this deck has. And because it's a servant, even though you're warping a card from your hand, if your overlords are out, then you can just replace this card, or replace the card that you warped from your hand when you overlord this. So this card's amazing. It's really nice because obviously it gives you that gradual hand control. It gives you a 1 energy 20k swing, and then you can overlord and replace the card that you warped. And it just feeds in with what the deck wants to do. Now, the Shroom, the 3-drop Shroom, is basically the same as this guy, except that you need a Salsa in combo area to play him. And instead of warping a card from the opponent's hand on play, he has an effect where when he attacks, you can warp the top card of your deck, and then you warp a 4 cost or less from their board. So that card was like very confusing to me for a couple of reasons. First of all, warping 4 costs or less is just not relevant anymore. Most battle cards that people are playing is not going to be 4 cost or less unless you're playing against a bit more of a low to the ground deck. It's like not the worst in the early game, but once you get later into the game, it's not reliable removal at all. The second thing is that the auto would only trigger when it attacked, which means, again, similar problem to the small Shroom, the 2-drop, the little cantrip guy that helps you self-awaken. It's vulnerable to Charismatic, it's vulnerable to things like Steadfast or the Yellow Sin promo. It's like anything that triggers that will stop it from being able to attack when it comes into play will just completely invalidate the card. And it just means that you then lost a card from your hand to do nothing, right? And the third thing is that in theory, if it sticks around for multiple turns because it's an on-attack auto, you should get extra value from that, right? Each turn. But the problem with that is that the 3-drop Shroom is a servant, so after you attack with it, it's not restanding. And it's just going to sit there on the board in rest mode. So there was no reason to make that card on attack and only 4 cost or less in my eyes. But the card sucks, and we have a much better version of that in the 6-drop now. So we've cut the 3-drop Shroom entirely as well. And we've basically cut all of the Shroom cards, to be honest, because the Shroom cards were always the worst half of the deck. But now that we have both Shroom Salsa names in the 6-drop and the 8-drop, and this card is just a better version than the 3-drop Shroom, there's no reason to run the Shroom package anymore. You just run the Salsas and then the good parts of the archetype. And the fact that this card needs a Shroom in combo area is, again, not hard to set up because we still have 8 copies of Shroom cards in the 6-drop and the 8-drop. And these were... Like, the 8-drop is the card you're looking to combo with most of the time anyways, because, it's a free 10k combo. So this is really the enabler for the deck now, because it enables the 3-drop Salsa and the 6-drop. But it was always the card you look to combo with as much as you can anyways, because it's just a free 10k, so it gives you more value on combo than the rest of the deck would, other than, like, the 1-drop Salsa, but that's very situational if you run out of 8-drops in Warp. So yeah, there's really no reason to run the Shrooms anymore, which is why I've cut them. The 3-drop Shroom always felt bad, the 2-drop Shroom always felt bad, and now we just have a better replacement for the 3-drop Shroom, and you can kind of consistently get away with not running the 2-drop Shroom. And again, another reason why you don't need to run the 2-drop Shroom is this next Anniversary Box support card, which is Demon God Salsa Dark Royalty, and this card is, again, another amazing support card from the Anniversary Box that really helps us deck out. So it's an Overrealm 4 with 20k power, When it comes into play from Overrealm, you can warp a card from your hand if your leader is a Demon Realm race card, and then draw a card and pick up a black battle card from your warp that costs between 3 and 7. So this guy is like a cheap Beyond All Limits in archetype, searchable off of leader, searchable off of 1-drop Salsa. Is a Salsa name, which again would be relevant if we're playing the Shrooms, but we're not, so it's kind of not relevant here anyways. But it's, again, comboable from warp. It sets up your warp from cards, like it means that you can cycle a card from your hand into the warp to draw a card and then also get Beyond All Limits effect. And the fact that it's Overrealm 4 rather than Overrealm 6 is hugely relevant, because it means that in the mid game you can actually cycle like the small pile of cards in your drop area back into your warp without having to like commit a bunch of Z energy to some weird play to then cycle your cards back to get Overrealm 6. You really need small overrealms in this deck, and previously I was running the Mirror as a really nice overrealm to again lean into that extra hand control. But you don't really need Mirror anymore because this card is just amazing value overall. Like, it's such great value. And you want to run 4 of it because, first of all, you can grab copies of himself back from the warp, so it means that if you start warping them early, and as long as you find 1 copy, you can just keep cycling this card over and over and over. And a big problem with this deck previously was that you would have turns where you'd kind of run out of decent overrealms because you couldn't afford to run too many overrealms in the deck, because the deck doesn't fill its drop area enough. So your hand would get clogged with these useless overrealms in the early game, and then once you start getting rid of them, you'd start to run out of them in the mid game, and that's where the deck would again fall apart. But this card really fixes those problems because it's a small overrealm that can keep cycling itself back, so you only need to see the 1 copy, and as long as you've warped 1 earlier on, then you should be fine. But the other reason why you want to be running 4 copies of it is because of its second auto, which is that if your leader is a Salsa card, when this card in your deck is sent to your warp by one of your skills, you draw a card, you warp a card from your hand, and then you warp the top card of your deck. So if you're lucky enough to hit this off of your early warps, like turn 1 and 2, where you're setting up your Awaken, it just speeds up your Awaken. And it's another reason why we don't need the 2-drop Shroom anymore, because we have the chance to hit this when we are using our early cantrips or our leader top 5. Because it will speed up your Awaken, because it puts another 2 cards in the warp when it's sent to the warp from your deck. But it also cycles you a card, so again, you can basically mulligan a card from your hand, but the card that you're mulliganing goes to your warp rather than back into your deck. So it means that it's, you know, there in your warp for its warp effects and stuff. So yeah, this card is absolutely amazing. It's really the small overrealm that this deck needed, because it really did need a good in-archetype overrealm. And it's also searchable, unlike the Mirror that we used to run. It's just an amazing card. And then, just like in my previous profile, I still think you want to run a couple of big overrealms in the deck. So we are running a couple of big overrealms, just as sort of more finishers, so that once you get to that end game, you can actually drop a threatening attacker rather than just a little 20k guy. And those big finishers are now 1 Beyond All Limits, 1 Heated Fighting Spirit, and 1 Dark Broly. So previously, I was running a couple of Dark Brolys just as my big finisher overrealm, and the reason for that was because if you warp it in the early stages of the game, it can be a nice play for 2 energy when you're playing it from your warp, just to get decent removal, because again, the deck really lacked removal. So another big issue that the deck had was that if your leader attack gets negated and you can't get to that activate battle stage, you're not really going to be able to play very many guys from your warp that turn, and so it means you're not doing all that much proactively. And so that was again a nice hole that this Dark Broly card filled, because if your leader attack got negated previous to a lot of this deck's new support, you could just play this guy from your warp for 2 energy. It's not the best play in the world, but you know, it warps a guy, which this deck did struggle with removal, and it gives you a 30k body that you can swing in with, and then you can cycle it back into your warp once it dies. This deck no longer really has that same issue with removal. There's a lot more removal pieces that the deck has now, especially in the Z deck as well, so you don't really need to worry about removal so much. I still like it as a one-off, because again, if you warp it early on, then it's perfect, because you can just play, like, there are still turns where you get floodgated and you'll struggle to create value on your own turn, and so this guy can just do that for you a lot of the time. And it's also still just a nice endgame overrealm if you don't see one of these 2 guys. The reason why I'm now running each of these guys instead of just a couple of Dark Broly's is because of this Salsa. So previously I stood by the idea that you couldn't really run this package in the deck, because if you warp the Beyond All Limits, the Vegeta is just going to be a worse version of Dark Broly, because you know, if you overwhelm, like if you need to use the Dark Broly or the Vegeta as removal early on, then the Dark Broly will be better later in the game. Whereas Vegeta is just going to be another card in your warp. Dark Broly you can obviously play from your warp. So my logic was in not running this package for a really long time was that if you warp this Goku early on, the package is kind of irrelevant and it's just worse than running the Dark Broly's. And so rather than running this package, I'd just rather run 2 Dark Broly's, because then if I warp either of them, I can still play them from warp. If I see either of them and have to use either of them early, I can still then play them from warp later on. The Dark Broly just had a lot more utility than either of these guys. And it just never felt quite as consistent. But the reason why you can run this package now is because of the Salsa. So with the Salsa, you kind of want to run a toolbox of different cards that you can grab back from Salsa, because the idea is you're probably going to aim to play Salsa at least every other turn, if not every turn, because you want to be cycling cards from your drop back into your warp as much as possible, so that you still have those plays each turn from your warp, and so that you still have the free 10k combos with your leader. So ideally you're using this every turn, if not every other turn. The issue with this card becomes that if you see multiple copies of this card in your hand, the secondary and third and tertiary copies become much less valuable than just the one copy, because of the fact that you're probably just grabbing a copy of himself back every time that you play him. Because the issue with this card in the deck is that going through the archetype, pretty much all of the cards that you can grab back in the archetype are going to be better in your warp than they are in your hand. In the archetype, you can grab back the Salsas, which do the same thing in your hand as they do in the warp. But if you play them from hand, they cost you an extra card because you played it from the hand. And the 6-drops, which can only be played from warp for 1 energy, so you would never grab this card back either. And the rest of the guys, like the 8-drop you can't grab back, and the 1-drops you can't grab back, which would maybe be some of the better targets in archetype, right? So looking at the archetype, the only card you're grabbing back off himself is copies of himself. So there's no reason why you'd ever want to see 2 copies of this card in your hand as opposed to just the 1, because just the 1 copy serves the same purpose as the 2 copies, right? And so I wanted to include kind of a toolbox of cards that I can grab back off of the Salsa in this deck, so that for cases where I see multiple copies of this card in my hand and I don't need to grab back another copy of himself, I can actually grab something useful back from my warp, rather than just another copy of himself or some random Shroom or Salsa that I'm just going to end up warping later on anyways. And so that's a big reason why I decided to include this package, was because now the problem of if either of these guys gets warped early, the other one just loses all of its value, is no longer an issue anymore, because you can just grab them back off of the Salsa in the mid game when you see multiple copies of these guys, or when you're looking to set up a kill turn in your next turn. And then you have the combo in your hand of the Black Spice, where you just go over Goku, pay 1 Vegeta, and you get 2 30ks for 1 energy, which is absolutely crazy. So that's a big reason why I'm running this package now, when I really didn't like the package in the deck for a really long time. I still think the one of Dark Broly is a great addition to the deck, and also we got a Flex the Head Judge stamp, shout out to Peter Dance for hooking me up. But yeah, I still love the card in the deck. It's still really nice as a proactive play when you get floodgated, or your leader swing gets negated and your hand is a bit ass. It's a very nice card just to have as a one-off, but the Black Spice package actually works in the deck now, which is lovely to see. And so going on to a couple of other packages that we now have space to include from cutting out a lot of the fat in the deck, with obviously the Shroom packages and the fact that the deck now has actually decent removal and everything. You don't have to run a lot of the weird tech choices that I used to run in the past. And these are also a lot of cards that are going to be amazing to grab back off of the Salsa, which again is why I wanted to, create the deck into a lot more of a toolboxy deck, where the Salsa can kind of grab you back a bunch of different cards, where one card is good for one matchup, one card is good for another matchup, this card is good just generically, good situationally. There's like a whole package of cards that I've included that you want to be grabbing back off the Salsa depending on matchup and situation, which feels really nice to play because it feels like you have a lot of options every turn now. Whereas previously it was like swing with your leader. Did the attack get negated? No. Okay, maybe you can play. Yes. Okay, well, just pass turn and see what happens. The Salsa and the new additions to the Z deck really make the deck much more interesting to play when you actually get negated and when people know what the deck does and know how to play around it. So going on to this package being the Toa package, we're running 2 of the 2-drop Toa and 3 of the 3-drop. So, you know, this is a package where people kind of go back and forth on either maxing out or just not running at all in a lot of Demon Realm race decks nowadays. We all know that this package is very strong. It's just kind of a question of, like, is it worth running in certain decks as opposed to is it not? And I really like this ratio in this deck for a couple of reasons. The first being that the 2-drop Toa, you only ever need to see 1 copy of it throughout the game. So I don't see a reason why you'd need to run 4 copies. 3 copies is maybe acceptable, but I don't think you ever need 4, and it just takes up too much space in the deck. The only issue with the 2-drop Toa is that you can't grab it back off of the Salsa Overrealm. So if you warp both of the copies early on, then this package becomes a lot more useless, to be honest. But as long as you see 1 copy at some point throughout the game, because it's got Deflect, it's quite hard to interrupt, especially with Charismatic now being limited to 1 on the recent ban list. So it's very tricky to interrupt, and it's just a lot of value. Again, it gives you a bit more removal, which, like I say, the deck doesn't really struggle with as much anymore, but it's just nice to have on this package. But the main reason we're running the package is because of the 3-drop Toa. The 3-drop Toa can be added back off of Salsa, first of all, because it's a 3-drop. So again, as long as you see 1 copy of this 2-drop, you can, if you need to, grab back 3-drops from your warp off of the Salsa. If you've already got 1 3-drop, you can go into the Toa chain on that turn, and then wait a turn, and then next turn, if you need to go into the Toa chain again, you can just grab back the copy you played last turn from the warp. It becomes very flexible, and the main reason why I like this package in the deck is because of the impact that this card has on unisons with 4 or more markers on. Because this deck doesn't put on a huge number of swings each turn, which can make it very tricky to actually deal with unisons, especially early in the game. And so this card just kind of single-handedly punishes people for playing unisons, which is great for a deck that obviously can't really deal with them otherwise. And it also, regardless of the actual 3-drop Toa's effect, the package offers you 3 swings at a potential unison, which is great, especially with the Z Battle card Toa, which lets you play this guy for free, so that in total you can get 3 swings at a unison for 1 energy. But it also lets you just turn on the gas a little bit on people's face. If you're wanting to go for game, you can push with, you know, this package, and it helps you get 3 more swings through, which against a non-Z Awakened 20k, like a non-20k leader, as long as the leader is still 15k, this package is really good to help push with. But yeah, it's especially nice just because it's removal, plus it helps punish unisons with the 3-drop. The 3-drop is recyclable, so as long as you see a 2-drop at some point, you're Gucci. And then the package is super cheap to play. And again, it's all Demon Realm race, so worst case scenario, all of this stuff gets warped off of your early effects, so you never see them in the game. But you can still combo them off of leader. It's still just cards that you can combo off from your warp, which is perfect. And so going into some of the other packages we've got 3 of the new combo, Assailant's Fury. So this is the only combo that we're running in the deck, but because of the fact that we're warping a lot early, it's fine. Because if we warp 1 copy of this early, then that sets up the other 2 copies for the rest of the game. Again, it's a card that you can grab back off of Salsa, so even if you warp all 3 of these in the early turns, you can grab 1 back off of Salsa for the moment that you need barrier removal. The only issue with this card is the fact that the barrier removal is reliant on your Z-deck count, and this deck naturally goes through its Z-deck quite quickly, because you need to be cycling your Z energy back into your drop to then overwhelm, to then play the guys from warp again quite consistently. So it kind of goes against what the deck wants to do, but because the main barrier cards that we're looking to hit are like 4 costs or less anyways, being like Poutine or the Sin promo or, you know, that sort of stuff, this card is generally okay, and against any sort of matchup, mainly yellow obviously, but any sort of matchup where you expect any barrier cards, it's just important to be mindful of your Z-deck count so that you can prepare this card as well. And generally when playing this deck, I would advise siding a 4th copy, just again for those matchups where you really need to see this card every turn. But regardless of the barrier removal, again, it's just a little bit of spot removal here and there, but it's also just a 25k swing for 1 energy that can gain double strike sometimes. Which, again, it's a nice play if your leader attack gets negated, or if you get floodgated, or something like that. You can just play this guy as a 1 energy, 25k double strike swing, and try and push a bit of damage, or get a couple of cards out your opponent's hand. And that's kind of what all of these packages that I've included into the deck try to tie into, is the idea of, if your leader swing doesn't get negated, what are you going to be doing with your turn? And am I going to be able to fit packages in that are going to be proactive enough for me to allow myself to make plays when my leader swing gets negated, but are also between 3 and 7 cost, or run cards that are between 3 and 7 cost so that I can grab it back with Salsa if I'm missing parts of the package in my hand. And then going on with some more proactive plays, we've just got the 1 copy of the Berserk Instincts. I really like this tech in any deck that is running Overlords naturally. And so this deck obviously has the 1-drop Meki, which is an Overlord, so if you have any of those stick around, you can kind of just use this again as a nice proactive play that doesn't rely your leader swing to go through, to swing 25k through, and then Overlord it off and just replace the card in your hand. It's also just nice as a free 10k. It's like not a bad one-off, and again, you can grab it back off of your Salsa if you just need one more 25k double strike swing to try and push through for game or something. Just a lovely card to have. So, the secret rare for the deck, in my opinion, it's quite obvious going to be Evil Saiyan, for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's a black secret rare, which means that it's not going to stunt your Awaken if you warp it on the top 6 cards of your deck when you're going for the top 6 Awaken. And if you were to run any sort of off-color SCR, like I know people consider Bursting Rage in a deck like this, where you have a very strong Z leader, if you were to run any sort of SCR like that, it would really slow down the Awaken, and it can kind of stunt your early turns, which I don't think is worth it. But also, this is an SCR that plays itself from Warp, so you actually want to Warp this early on, and then it just becomes alive. This deck also generally just really struggles with finishing the game. It can play the grind game out super well, and it can grind people down, but a lot of the time, you'll either get outgrinded by slower decks, or you'll just lose to time, which does suck. So this card just gives you the out to be able to just close games out when you need to. And again, it's a play that sometimes you just use it if your opponent has spent their negates on your leader swings and you don't have much else to do for the turn. There are a lot of times where, like turn 4, I'll just drop this guy because, well, they've spent their negates on my leader swing. They're left a little bit defenseless. I'm not going to kill them this turn with it, but it's going to apply a lot of pressure, and it's going to put them on the back foot for the rest of the game, you know? And then going into some more of the standard black stuff, we have 4 super combos. Vegeta is definitely the best super combo for this deck. I disagree with anyone running the Demon Realm Race or Demon God super combos, because whilst they are searchable, you're not going to be playing the 1-drop Salsa past turn 2, unless, again, you get floodgated. But with the way that the deck is built now, you have better plays for 1 energy, even if you get, like, floodgated, than just dropping a 1-drop cantrip. So yes, they're searchable off of the leader front side and off of the Salsa 1-drop, but that's only going to be like maximum 3 top 5 searches in a game, but most likely it's going to be 1 or 2. And you can't combo super combos from your warp, so again, the Demon God, Demon Realm Race super combos don't give you much value there. Whereas these guys, they let you cycle any dead 1-cost 10ks that you've had it stuck in your hand back into your deck to draw more on a kill turn or on a, you know, defending a kill turn. But also we're running quite a few extra cards here, and so it helps you just cycle those back in as well to draw more combo power if you need to on a kill turn. But honestly, the main reason why I think this super combo is the correct one to choose is because it's a card that lets you place a card from your hand to the bottom of the deck. And the reason why that is super important is because of the Z Leaders effect. You want to be getting the 3-drop Salsa to the bottom of your deck on turns where you're looking to Z Awaken, because it just lets you free play the Salsa from the bottom of the deck. And that's super relevant with this super combo, because you can use this defensively or proactively to cycle a card to the bottom of your deck, draw 2, and then Z Awaken and just play the Salsa that you've just put to the bottom of the deck, which comes up so often, honestly. Like, you'd be surprised at how much that comes up, because you're not playing the 3-drop Salsa as much in the current build anymore, because the 6-drop is a lot of the time just better now, and you have a lot wider range of plays for 1 energy as well. So you're not playing the 3-drop Salsa as much anymore, and that means you're not going to be able to overlord it to the bottom of your deck as much anymore. And also the 1-drop Overlord doesn't stick around, or shouldn't stick around all that much anyways. So just having copies of the Salsa stuck in your hand, and then when you need to, you can bottom deck them with the super combo to free play them from your Z leader is absolutely amazing. And then we're running 2 Support of the Dark Empire, just to help you get from 5 life down a little bit. Because you do want to get to your Z leader not super early. You don't want to rush to it and take 2 life every time you swing with the 6-drop or anything, but you do want to look to get towards it for a kill condition. And then 2 Petrification because it's such a crazy good black negate. 2 Super Kamehameha because this deck, like I've been saying this whole time, can struggle to push through floodgates, so this is going to be super relevant. But also this is a card that can help you get from 4 or 3 life down to your Z Awaken. If your opponent has specifically been stalling you at higher life, but you've managed to get yourself down to 4 or 3 life with your 6-drop or your supports or whatever, and then they try to floodgate you, you can Super Kamehameha and then just Z Awaken, either with the 6-drops effect or just with the standard Z Awaken. And then 2 Gohan Rares. This deck is kind of like a burst deck in the sense that it warps the top cards of your deck every so often, so Gohan Rares are a no-brainer in the deck. And then the last card in the deck is another tech choice, being the Assassin from the Darkness Black Marseillan. It's a really nice card in the deck because the deck is super tanky with all of the free combo power that it gets, and this just kind of leans into that extra power. If you're playing against any sort of go wide deck or on any sort of kill turn, this card is going to be very, very powerful, especially if you can get to Z Awaken as well on that same turn. But also it's just another one-off that you can grab back off of your Overwhelm Salsa for when you need to, and it's just super flexible because of that. So going into the Z deck, first of all we have the Z Leader. So Z Leader is a 20k based double strike. You can only Z Awaken for 1 energy if your life is at 2 or less for 3 Z energy. And so that's why obviously the 6-drop is a great, another reason why the 6-drop is such a great card, because Z Awakening at 2 life is not the best, and so being able to Z Awaken at 3 or less life is just a nice little addition to the deck, obviously. To be honest, I don't actually use the 6-drops activate main to Z Awaken at 3 life all that often. Most of the time I just let people hit me down to 2 life instead, and then I just Z Awaken on defense like I used to anyways. But, you know, it's still a nice effect to have at your disposal, especially if your opponent is trying to stall you at a bit higher life. You can just take yourself down to 3 and then Awaken or Z Awaken. But being on 3 life is still very vulnerable, and you're not getting draw power from your Z Leader. The Z Leader doesn't draw you cards at all, so it's not advisable to Z Awaken super early into the game because you won't have set up your warp properly, and you won't have cycled into most of your good cards, because the Leader backside does give you quite a lot of cycle and draw power there. So it does have an Activate Battle where you can combo with up to 2 Demon God or Demon Realm races from your Warp that aren't super combos, so in theory you can go up to 40k base whenever you swing or defend on this, which is absolutely phenomenal. And again, that's another reason why the deck is so tanky. It's got an Activate main where you can place a Z energy to your drop area, check the bottom card of your deck. If it's a 3-cost Shroom or a 3-cost Salsa with Servant, you can play it for free. So that's why it's so important to still run the 3-drop Salsa. I still think the 3-drop Shroom is completely, like, super ass. But the 3-drop Salsa is amazing because you can free play it as a 20k and they warp a card from their hand. And because you free played it rather than using the Activate Battle skill, you don't have to warp one from your hand to play it, which is absolutely phenomenal. Bearing in mind that the 3-drop Salsa auto is limit 1 when it comes into play, so you can't play it from warp and then overlord it and then bring it back out from the bottom of the deck and get 2 warps from their hand in the same turn. But most of the time after turn 3, you're probably not playing that 3-drop Salsa as often as you might expect anyways. But this is the reason why it's so important to have those bottom deck effects in the deck, like the Vegeta Super Combo and like a couple of other cards, which we'll get into as well. And it's also just important to keep track of when you overloaded your 3-drop Salsas early on, and if you shuffle your deck or bottom deck any cards since then. But the Z Leader is super amazing and definitely a win condition that you should play towards, and just a value machine, to be honest. Another huge boost that this deck got in the anniversary box is the Black Z extra card. The reason why this card is so amazing is because it dumps so much Z energy and so many different cards into your drop area. So first of all, it's just a great card that you can play for 1 energy on turn 2 or turn 3 and dump one of your spares the energy back into the drop so that you can start setting up overwhelms. And a lot of the time, again, it's another proactive play that you can make if your leader of attack gets negated, which is just covering problems that the deck used to have that the deck really doesn't have that often anymore. But because both the activate battles are free, this deck is quite reliant on its energy costs. There's a lot of high cost energy things in this deck. Like everything costs 1 or 2 energy, but because those cards that cost 2 energy, you do want to be playing quite a lot, like the 8-drop Salsa Shroom. And even just the 1 energy plays, like, they're all very vulnerable, so you have to make sure that you're prepared for anything to get interrupted. So the fact that these activate battles are free is super relevant because you can't hold too much energy for defense. But also the fact that the first activate battle lets you cycle cards from your warp back into your drop. So, for example, on a kill turn, if you haven't got Overwhelm 6 set up because of your leader's permanent, you can use the activate battle to cycle the cards back into your drop to get Overwhelm 6 live. But also, it just is a 1-card way to get 4 cards into your drop area, because for the first activate battle, you drop 1 Z energy and put 3 cards from your warp back to your drop. And that is 4 cards, and that is 4 cards for the Overwhelm Salsa, and then you can Overwhelm Salsa in, grab back whatever play you were looking for that turn, cycle a card from your hand into the warp, and then you're kind of just set up for the turn. But other than that, it's just, you know, it's the generic color Z extra cards. Super amazing for every color. Works especially well in this deck because you need to cycle so much Z energy, so it's just another cheap 1 energy plus some extra Z energy cycle play. And that's the reason why we run 2 copies, because you'll find very often that you go through 2 copies, because you'll probably use 1 to get a proactive overwhelm and then use 1 to get a defensive plus 10k. But it also makes you more tanky because you're getting those free plus 10ks every so often with the Z extra card. We're running 2 Majin Buu, another amazing card. It's 1 energy to dump 2 Z energy and give you removal and give you pressure and give you potential defense with the blocker. Just an amazing card for this deck, and when this card came out was like when this deck started actually getting decent, you know. Being able to just cycle that Z energy back into the drop every turn and give you some extra removal is perfect. We've got the 1 Goku. This guy's just a finisher, you know. Swing double strike. It means that you can kind of put on a slew of double strikes on your kill turns because you've got this guy, you've got the Berserk Instincts, and you've got the 7-drop Cumber. And if you've got more energy, I guess you've got the 8-drop double striker as well. But it means that you have a lot of different 1 energy double strikes that you can go through and push through a lot of different negates if your opponent's on 2 life. And then the last card in the Z deck is the 1-drop Toa for the Toa chain, obviously. This card is actually relevant for a couple of reasons. Obviously, it free plays the Toa 2-drop and then lets you go up into the chain for much cheaper. But it, again, bottom decks a card from your hand. And that is a big reason why I actually ended up including the Toa chain into the deck. So it means on kill turns, you can play this guy from the Z deck, bottom deck a card from your hand, play the Toa chain out for free, which gives you 3 free swings, or 3 swings for 1 energy, I guess. But then if the card you bottom decked was the Salsa, you can then just free play it again off of the Z leader, which in theory gives you 4 free swings, plus removal off of the 2-drop Toa, plus a warp from hand off of the Salsa for 1 energy, which is absolutely crazy. And then in all of that, you've dumped 3 Z energy back to the drop, for 2 for this, and then 1 for the Z leader skill. If you're able to dump 1 Z energy, or you've got 1 card left in drop, you can overwhelm Salsa. But if you've got 3 cards left in drop, or you've got your Z extra card down, you can then put 3 cards from your warp back to the drop, and that gives you overwhelm 6 for your Goku Vegeta combo. And then for 2 energy, you've got 2 30k swings, 2 20k swings, and 2 15k swings, which becomes absolutely crazy. And that's where you can really start pressuring with the 1 energy double strikes that you've got left over as well. Plus, not to mention that your Z leader is a double strike threatening 40k double strike on swing. So that's really where kill turns for this deck become super, super fun to go through with this 1-drop Toa. There are a lot of times where you'll just use the 1-drop Toa early on because you need to dump some Z energy, you need some removal, you need to punish the fact that they've put a unison down with 4 markers on. And most of the time, you're probably not playing the Toa chain unless you've got this guy in the Z deck, to be honest. There are times where it comes up where you will go through the Toa chain for the 2 energy on the 2-drop Toa rather than just using this. But most of the time, you just use it the 1 time with the Z battle card, and then you kind of leave it for the rest of the game, unless they keep dropping 4 marker unisons, at which point you might as well just keep going through the Toa chain for 2 energy. That's a lot of value there. But yeah, that's kind of, well, I tried to make it a brief run through of the Shroom Salsa deck. It's a little bit longer than what I'd hoped, but wanted to break down everything as much as I could because this deck has undergone a huge number of changes. And whilst I don't believe the deck is competitive still, I definitely believe that it is way more viable than it used to be. And I do honestly, I could see it being the kind of thing that snuck into a top 16 here and there, if people learn how to play it correctly and learn the matchups. But regardless, it's a super fun deck. The build works much more smoothly now with the new support, and the fact that I've cut the shrooms makes me so much happier as well, because those cards sucked. But yeah, I hope that you guys enjoyed the deck profile, and that you give the list a go, because like I say, it's my favorite black deck. And it has been since it came out. Before I close off, there are a couple of cards that I guess I should go over. So the first being the 3-drop Meki Kabura for the archetype. This card used to be really good because it was a way to sort of facilitate your deck's plays when your leader swing got negated, because when it swings you can combo with a guy from Warp, and then you can obviously trigger all of your activate battle skills. I've cut it from the list now because of the fact that you don't really need, well, I don't think that you really need it anymore because of the fact that you have so many proactive plays in the deck without going into the activate battle step anymore. So that is huge. And also it was nice as a little overlord guy, but you're not using the 3-drop shroom anymore, so you don't really rely on the overlords anymore. And the 3-drop salsa, you still play it obviously, but you go into the 6-drop shroom salsa a lot, and the 8-drop shroom salsa a lot more than you would the 3-drop. And if you're going into the 8-drop shroom salsa, you often don't have energy left to then use an overlord, unless you've already got it stuck around on the board. And also another issue with this card is that you need 6 cards in your warp to play it for 1 energy from your hand. In the early game now, I'm often not having 6 cards in my warp until I trigger my first overwhelm, which sometimes can be like turn 3 or turn 4, which is quite late. So yeah, this card, it maybe is still good as like a 2-of, but I don't think the deck really needs it. And again, it's very vulnerable to things like charismatic, steadfast. Anything that hits it on play is just going to be very tricky to get through. The only other card that I did want to mention is Oceanus. So the 5-drop Oceanus Floodgate, I think could be a decent inclusion in the deck because again, it's another card that you can grab back off of your Salsa Overwhelms, and it offers you that extra level of defense, extra tankiness on your leader and your Z leader. The only issue with it is that you have to leave 2 energy open for it, but in the slower matchups, and especially against yellow because they can struggle to deal with Oceanus, I think it could be a good call. I don't have it in the current build, but maybe it's something to look into, at least in the side deck for yellow matchups, I suppose. But maybe a card to consider there. But yeah, I'll stop rambling now. That's going to be it from me for today, guys. Hope you guys enjoyed the deck profile and you toy with some of these ideas that I've laid out on the table. And I'll catch you guys in the next one.